Quick show of hands, how many of you have got issues with finding good people to hire into your organisations and keeping them once you've found them? A few people nervously going, don't tell anybody though, will you? Because we might want to recruit them. Yeah, okay. So we know it's a big issue. We're joined by Thomas Newman. Thomas works for the Together Group. I've learned something about the Together Group. I'm sure he'll tell you a little bit more about them. I thought it was just housing, apparently. It's so much more than that. And Thomas has a varied career. He's been in a number of roles, both here in the UK and internationally. So this is an issue which many organisations deal with, whether you're a small organisation needing to keep hold of the really important people, the key individuals, or whether you're a larger organisation just trying to get people to stay within the organisation rather than chase other opportunities that may be available to them. So give it up for Thomas Newman on the talent and development and retention cycle.
Afternoon, everybody. I guess to answer first of all Robin's question. So I have worked in several different organisations, and in the last 3 occasions of the businesses that I've been in, we've faced this exact problem for numerous reasons. How do we make sure that we keep good people? So just to begin with today, so the good news is I'm from the north of England, so that means we try and keep things simple. So nothing's going to be overly complex today. And I guess ultimately with doing this, with keeping good people or mastering the talent development and retention cycle, for me, it's not complex. There is no silver bullet that I'm going to give you today. But what I can promise you is if you follow the steps that I'm going to go through with you today, you will be mastering the talent and development cycle. So I'm going to touch on sort of three key areas for me, which are, first of all, something that we would always do is learning professionals, which is trying to understand what the problem is. So I'm going to touch on the building blocks that we need to identify the talent profiles within our business. And then ultimately, how do we give that talent the right development in the right way at the right time. I'm going to spend most of the day, to be honest with you, in that area to demonstrate sort of laying the foundations of what we're talking about. But I wanted to give you 2 practical steps after that, which is then based on that, how do we resource to make sure that we deliver against that need, and where we need to sometimes getting in the boardroom and actually generating the buy-in from our executives to go ahead and do just that. So I've heard a lot, I've been to quite a lot of seminars today, to be fair myself, and a lot of people have talked about storytelling. And when I got asked to do this, I was trying to think about what was the best way to explain how to do this. So I'm actually going to do it as a story. Don't worry, it's not a fictional story. It's actually the story that has occurred in the last business I've been in. So it doesn't start with once upon a time, but it does start with why. So in order for us to understand why we needed to do this, we were trying to figure out what was the end goal. I'd been in the business just under 12 months. I'd been pushing quite hard to get the business to recognize the need for making sure we had a more robust approach to our talent in order to make sure that we kept hold of our good people. Really struggled, lots of skeptical people, even within their own HR function, and certainly out there within the business too. At the moment, we're currently going through a transformation. Potentially lots of people in the room might be as well. And we were actually conducting some stakeholder interviews, some executives, some key stakeholders within the business, and some managers, trying to understand what at the time, it was actually our leadership development needs. Through that process of speaking to these people, where we landed and the key theme that was coming out within our business was, as we go through this transformation, the non-negotiables were, we cannot lose our best people, and we needed to figure out how we were going to take people from A to B. So for me, that was almost like the aha moment, because I'd been pushing for such a long time. I say a long time, it was 12 months. It felt like a long time because it was very difficult. To try and get the business to think more around how we map our talent in the business, and ultimately what provisions can we put in place to make sure that we keep them. So I sat down with my team, because ultimately at that stage we had our why. Our why was, not falling over, going through a transformation, and ultimately we needed to make sure that we didn't lose our good people. So I sat down with my team. Our first question that came up was, who do we want to keep? So if we're saying our good people, what did that even mean? Were we going to make a list? Well, absolutely not. The business is far too big to start making a list of people that we can't afford to leave. So that's one thing that came out of the meeting that I had with my team. They also discussed with me, even once we've done that, how do we identify the needs of these people? Because ultimately, if we're going to keep them, we need to give them what they want, not what we want. And ultimately, from that meeting as well, we also talked around what is our actual ethos within the business. So our ethos in the organization I'm in at the moment, our mission, is to make sure that we allow every single person to reach their potential. Not just the managers, not just the leaders, not just the people who we might perceive as the best people in the business, but everyone has the divine right in our organization to be able to reach their potential. Everyone knows as well, hopefully everyone has it within their team, the one sensible person who also puts their hand up and says, but we only have so much time and so much budget. Very, very true. And all questions that I'm going to answer for you today. So we have our why, and we have a couple of questions or thoughts that are spinning around with my team at this moment in time. So now we've got the why, and we know that we need to make sure we keep our people, we needed to try and establish the who. So who are our good people? And we came up with this. So people may have seen talent management frameworks before. I've worked with a 9-box. We actually worked with Gartner on creating a 5-box, which for me I was a little bit skeptical at first because it seemed like it might be overly simple, but it works really well. And I'd go back to the point I said at the beginning. For me, the simpler that you can build something, the easier it is to implement in a business. So in order to understand who did we want to keep, we only really needed to do 2 things. Measure these people on performance. Well, that was pretty easy because we already had a performance management system, so therefore we already had performance management ratings. The only thing that we overlaid with that through Gartner was potential. So did the person have aspiration? So did they want to be stretched and move into their next role? Did they have the ability to? And then ultimately engagement. Did they want it? Can they do it? But do they want to do it with us? And through this scoring system, we then had a mapping system. So what we've got here is our high potential. So roughly, by the way, these aren't our stats. They aren't that clean from an organization. This is roughly what your curve should look like. But we have our high potential. So these are the people who are currently mastering their role, but they also have the ability to move on. The reality of this is these are probably our senior leaders of the future, but again, just 5% of our business. We've then got here our emerging potential. So these at the moment aren't scoring quite as high on performance, but we're absolutely scoring them high on potential. So they probably haven't mastered the job that they're currently doing, but we know that their potential stars of the future. So on the right-hand side here, we've got our high potentials. On the left-hand side, we've got our high performers. So normally around 10 to 15% of your business. They are absolutely mastering their role, but are not scoring very high on potential. Just as a note, as we go through this as well, I say not currently scoring high on potential. So when we went through this within my business, I remember there was one particular person who we were absolutely convinced, everyone knew it, would finish in here. They didn't. The reason they didn't is literally they just had a baby. So what I would say to you is do not forget with things like this, it's dynamic. So they were a high performer and we knew they were going to have high potential. At that moment in time, their aspiration wasn't there. They had more important things going on in their lives. It might be a year's time, 2 years' time, where that would then go back up and we would find them in here. We then have, on the left-hand side here, our valued contributors. So that equates to 60 to 70% of our business. So these are people who really middle of the road. Come in at 9, go home at 5, absolutely fine, moderately performing quite well, low on potential. And then finally, hopefully for everybody, yours is closer to here than it is here, but somewhere between 0 and 5% of our business are talent issues. So those people who, they're low on potential, but unfortunately currently underperforming in their business as well. So, we're going to answer this question, but if I can get a show of hands. So my ask through the stakeholder engagement that I had was make sure we don't lose our good people, and that was the mission. Within this, of those boxes, how many of those do you think that we should have been targeting to keep? So can I get a show of hands for those who think only one box that we should be trying to keep within the business? 2 boxes? 3? 4? 5? Okay, interesting. So I think the consensus was 4. I'm going to come back to that when I answer this question in a couple of slides' time, but just to recap so far then. So we've touched on the why. We now know why we want to do it. And we're now starting to build a process of understanding the who. The ask was, do not lose good people. When I sat down with my team and we're starting to look at resource and budget, don't lose good people, but also allow everybody to reach their potential, we know that my team is 7 people, our business has over 1,000 employees. We simply, the numbers will not equate for us to being able to deliver this. So we're going to need somebody else's support in order to do this. So we've done the who, we've also got the by who, and ultimately, without our management population, we would not be able to deliver this. So our managers, as part of this process, would be the sources of our data, because don't forget that we need to understand what people's performance is. It's done through the performance management process, but it's scored by their manager. We also need someone to do the scoring system for potential. Well, I can't do it for over 1,000 people, nor can my team. And who knows them best? Ultimately, their manager. So the manager is the person who will provide us with that data. But also, once we've got who we need and how are we going to do it, we also need to make sure that the manager is the supporter of the process. So in our business, we always talk about a triangle. So the triangle is ultimately who is accountable for what. So our manager is the supporter of development. Our duty is to give people the platform to develop, and the individual is the accountable that has to make it happen. So that's the triangle that we offer within our business, and the manager plays a role within that. The final part is they're a coach. So they need to be part of the learning solution. And again, I'm going to touch on that as I move on to the next slide. So we have the why, we have the who, we also have the by who. We're now going to touch finally on the how. So how we've broken this down and our objective and what we believe of how to execute this is it says there, if we can connect correctly the needs of each box, that is how we would unlock performance. So we had a mission statement almost against every box within our 5 box. So for our high potentials, so remember 5% of our business, the requirement for them is to be challenged and stretched. So for anyone who's in the room who feels, or you probably know if you're a high potential, you will know that you constantly need challenging within the business. You're never satisfied. You need to be given things. The great thing for us is we were literally just about to go through a transformation, lots of different things happening, lots of projects within the business. What a great opportunity to put this 5% in action and actually deliver against the transformation. We also have our emerging potentials. So we know those are also really hungry for development. But they haven't quite mastered the job that they're in. So we need to make sure that we're investing in them, because ultimately that's our pipeline. These potentials are potentially our future high potentials. And then as we move over onto the left-hand side, and I guess this is where it moves slightly away from learning, but really still within the talent landscape, we have our high performers. That's 10 to 15% of the business. These people are the people who are performing day in, day out for the organization, an area that we simply can't lose. But as we said with that particular person who didn't finish in the high potentials, it's not necessarily their next step that they're looking for. But we need to make sure that they're feeling valued. So we need to start thinking about what things can we do, potentially through our managers, that make sure that we're keeping this population happy and they feel valued. And then don't forget, we've got the 60 or 70% of the organization that are literally sitting in here. You might get where I'm going to with asking how many boxes that we needed to make sure we kept hold of. So for any of those who answered 4 or below, if we don't concentrate on this box here, that means that we're potentially saying that we're willing to sacrifice 60 or 70% of our organization through attrition. Something that, if we're about to go through a transformation or not, is probably not a good idea. So we need to make sure that they're kept engaged. And the reason why I asked about how many boxes do you think that we need to think about keeping hold of, I agree, by the way, for all those who naturally put their hand up for 4 boxes. That's also what our executives did. They wanted to know every single person who was in here because we needed to get rid of them. From our side, absolutely not as a starting point. Why are we giving up on anyone to begin with? These people are underperforming, potentially for a variety of different reasons. Within this, our objective actually is to support and effectively performance management, hopefully to turn the corner. Don't get me wrong, if they don't, then it might be that process leads them to exit the business. But as a starting point, and with an ethos of everyone should be able to reach their potential, writing off any group at this moment in time is not something that we needed to do. So actually, for the very minority who did put their hands up for 5, your starting point is actually nobody is up for grabs for giving up on. But ultimately, from a resource concentration point of view, we know that we need to be giving development on the right-hand side because these are the people who are potentially going to be senior leaders or executives of the future, but don't account for the need to keep these people happy and engaged and to get this box also looking to turn the corner. We absolutely don't have enough time today to really deep dive into what our development structure was for each of these boxes, but I wanted to give you an example of one. So for our high potentials, as I said before, so the objective was to ultimately find methods to be able to challenge and stretch this top 5% that existed within our business. And we broke that down into 4 development blocks. So we know that naturally we probably land straight at what development do they need, and sometimes it is development or an extra skill that they don't have that we identify. So one of our development blocks is education, but we have 3 others as well. We have experience. So is there something at the moment that they haven't yet experienced that they would need to in order to go and do their next job? I'll give you a great example of, our CFO, so our Chief Finance Officer, was potentially the next in line to be the CEO. But ultimately, from his point of view, he'd only really experienced things in his lane. So we needed to get him involved in more operational things. So his commercials were very sound, but it might be more from an operational side that he wasn't rounded enough. So as we went through the transformation, he could absolutely be somebody who we might want to give some experience as maybe a sponsor within one of the operational strands within the transformation. Sometimes within our development, it's not even that people need development or need something, they just need to be seen. So a development block that we also have is exposure. And this accounts definitely for more people who are high potentials, but potentially introverted. So very difficult to find in your business. You might have seen before as well, if you've ever looked at high potentials, a Harvard Business did a paper on high potentials. There are more introverted high potentials in the world than extroverted. But I promise you now, if you implement this into your business, you'll definitely find the extroverts first because they show themselves really easily. But the introverts are a greater population of high potentials within your business. That's the difficulty. And sometimes they are just an unknown quantity. So we found methods of creating exposure. We have a very sociable business, so it's quite easy. We have the same guy who owns the business who started it 50 years ago. I was just saying to Robbie, and he's a billionaire that you just can't Google, but he loves taking people out for dinner. He literally goes out for dinner like 3 or 4 times a week. We have an amazing forum to give people exposure because ultimately we just send them out for dinner with Henry, and that's the easiest way of getting people to be known and seen by him. And the last one of our 4 development blocks is self-awareness. So sometimes actually our starting point is to do something like a 360 with these high potentials to see what are their peers and stakeholders actually saying about them in order to then generate a performance plan for them based on some diagnosis that we get from there. So as I said, I wanted to spend quite a bit of time talking to you about the why, the who, and the how. We then will move on to how are we going to do this. So what I've just talked to you about really is talent organization. What we then need to move on is talent activation. So often I've sat in businesses before where you spend lots and lots of time doing a 5-box, putting everyone where they need to be, and then nothing, or not a lot. So why would you organize this talent, understand its needs, and then not activate it by actually doing something about it? So when I talk about this, and I guess like the bit that I wanted to sort of lean on today, especially relating to talent, is yes, we have our team, we create hypo programs, and we have a suite of learning. We also have digital learning solutions available. We're actually currently talking to 2 businesses about an LXP. It's bizarre because they're both in there today. One's asked me out for a drink tonight. It's not a woman, by the way. The other one knows. Now they want to invite me for a drink, so I'm probably going to have a lot of drinks tonight. But that service is more the broader the business. The bit I wanted to focus on today is, and I sat in a session just before this where they were talking about sort of all the amazing technology that's coming down the track, but not forgetting the commodity of learning that is people as well. And just to give you a bit of insight into some of the things that we've put in place in the current business that I'm in. So I touched on earlier about the managers and their ability to coach. So we have managers now, because we have the 5-box, who are coaching their talent issues to try and performance manage them better. But they're also carrying out career conversations, and they're being career coaches as well. So immediately we have managers who are part of the solution. We also have a mentor program. So if you think about our emerging potentials and our high potentials who need some type of development, and if it is out of the development block of experience, we can connect them to a mentor. We actually use a platform in order to do this. Also with expert delivery, so when we were trying to scale learning within the business, so like I said, we've got over 1,000 employees and a team of 7. What we've actually done is we've leveraged our high performers and our high potentials to run sessions themselves about their own expertise. And if you think about the high performers, their need is to feel valued. Well, what's more valuable than saying to someone, you're that good, can you stand up and tell everybody else about what you do? So actually now we're starting to use both sides of it, because our learners within our 5-box are getting learning, but we're actually also using people within the 5-box to do the learning. Two of the other pieces that we've looked at, not necessarily directly associated to talent, but on a quarterly basis is part of our talent development and retention cycle. We run exec experiences. So this is where, for example, like myself and Robin here today, we'll literally get them to stand up in front of the business and we'll just talk to them about their career, or particular, we had someone where we were talking about how they unlocked their potential. Recently, we've got an executive who's sort of 38 years old, who'd already been an MD in another business. We're like, why would we not harness that experience that he's had and educate the rest of the business on his journey? So we run those exec experiences on a quarterly basis to almost like inspire everyone else of almost of the art of what's possible. And the final thing that we're doing in the current organisation I'm in, we have a really strong learning culture. I was really lucky to walk into a business that genuinely had a really strong learning culture. So I've really pushed against an open door a lot of the time with the business that I'm currently in. But we've created a culture where feedback, it happens all the time, simply by creating an initiative to make sure that at the end of a program, or at the end of a project or a process, we simply give feedback around what that's like. So like I said, I just wanted to spend a little bit of time away from the understanding and give you a bit of an insight into the practicalities of how did we scale enough resource to make sure that we were feeding all of those 5 boxes that I've talked about to you today. The last part I wanted to touch on, we don't always have to sit in front of the board, I guess, to get them to validate what we want to do. In this scenario, I did, just because of putting that 5-box in place. So in order to keep it dynamic, we needed to run that cycle, or we decided to run that cycle every 6 months. So it was a new part of the performance management process and therefore needed some approval. So I just wanted to finish today, I guess, by talking about the day that we went in that room, how we positioned it, and ultimately how the answer from the CEO was, why would we not always have been doing this? And it was pretty simple, to be honest, which started with, why are we doing this? And for me, if we look in the, not just in the industry at the moment, but within organizations itself, we are experiencing a time where there are skill shortages, there are economic challenges, and there are technological advancements all the time. There's never been a time where people are more important. So our position to our executives were, if we were able to embed a process that made sure that our good people, but we gave the ability of everyone staying in our business because we were engaging them in the right way, that would give us a competitive advantage over our current competition. And my advice when doing this is pretty simple. And it was advice that was given to me by an executive once, which is, if you are to go in the boardroom and ask for something, be clear. Say exactly what you want from them. And on that day when I went in, we only asked for 2 things. One, to get approval to do the 5-box. The other one was probably harder and bigger, which was to commit long term to this. Do not allow us to deter away from doing this when things got busy or when something else came up. But actually, if we're going to do this, we needed to commit in the long term. And the value was given through exactly what I've done with you today, talking about the why. So why are we going to do it? And we talked about the benefits. I actually was able to say on the day when we were in there that some of the people in that room were the ones who said we cannot lose good people. So that is the reason why we wanted to do it. The what are we going to do was about embedding that process, that 5 box with the managers every 6 months to keep it dynamic so that we got a landscape view of what our talent looked like within the business. And finally, the how. How are we going to execute a learning plan that would deliver against those objectives? How are we going to stretch our high potentials? How are we going to engage our our valued contributors? And how are we going to make our talent issues turn the corner to make sure that they started performing again? The final point was we needed to link it to what was important to them, but both in short and long term. Because we know if we're asking for a long-term commitment, if we don't give them immediate value, we're going to find it very difficult. And the first part that I started with was attrition. So the challenge I have with attrition, right, is ours is about 17%. But 17% of what? Are we losing good people? Are we losing bad people? All we know is we're losing people. Actually, if you overlay the 5 box on your 17%, you can see what you're losing. So are you losing high potentials or are you losing talent issues? Because 17% of talent issues is great work because potentially you're managing bad people out of the business. 17% of high potentials is terrible news because we're losing great people. So that was an immediate value that got their ears pricked. But also within our business, hopefully like yours, D&I is really important. I currently work in financial services, where there's a massive stigma around boards being very white, very old. I won't say what the other term is for the board members at our organisation, but there's a real stigma against it. And when we do our surveys, the thing that always comes up is we can't see any change. Well, actually, if we, again, overlay our 5 box with our high potentials and our emerging potentials, which are our stars of the future, and have a look at that, we can actually see what's coming through. And what we actually found in our business is our board is predominantly male, yes. Our high potential split was 51% women, 49% men, which showed us straight away, actually we were making great traction towards changing that, because we had more women, granted it was 1%, but we had more women in classed as high potentials in our business than we did men. So our stars of the future, our future executives, are more likely to be a woman than they were a man. And as I said before, we were just about to start our transformation. So what better time to have a pool of people to have a look at who would be on those strategic projects. And again, we would know that that would potentially be our top 5% of people, might be the people that we want to go and dip into to be able to do that. So those were the immediate wins that we could show our board. Ultimately, though, the long-term view was, if we're going to do this and commit to it, the biggest value we will get is we will be engaging and developing all of our colleagues within our business, which in turn will help us to retain our good people. So as I said, for me, that is how you would master the talent development and retention cycle. I know Robin is potentially going to put out any questions that people have, but I would finish today with a question for you, which is, based on what I've shown you today, consider your own businesses. What are the current threats and consequences if you're not doing this, of doing this? Because when we found our why, we knew we needed to make sure that we did it pretty quickly to make sure that that transformation was a success. Thank you.
Really interesting, thank you very much. And I think, you know, I've been around in the business for a very long time. And this used to be the preserve of the very large. These were the organisations with the 300 intake graduate recruitment schemes and things like that. those are the people who did this stuff, and that was it. It wasn't available to anybody else because it was just too complicated and too difficult. And the fact that we've got an organisation which is not small, but 1,000 people is not mega either, that's putting in a process like this, I think is magnificent. We have time for 2 or 3 questions, and we have hands going up all over the place. Can we have one down the front here? Because this gentleman was at the front, and then the lady next to her, and then the person who's in the white jumper there in the middle. Great.
Hi, thanks for sharing your thoughts. I'm Martin from BT. What I want to understand was you talked a lot about managers playing a role in this. So I just wondered what challenges you came across with that group and what efforts you've had to put into them to support this.
When I thought, so I sat there and thought, right, what kind of questions might they ask? I had 2, managers and ROI. Those are the 2 that I was like, right, okay. It's a great question, right? For me, were there challenges? Are there challenges? Yes. I think it's a numbers game, so it's trying to get as many onboarded as possible. It's a continuous problem and a continuous effort to try and get them to do exactly what we need to do. I think the point that I would make of how you do it successfully is give them the why. So if they have value to them, then it's more likely that they're going to do it, right? If we're telling them to do it because it's important for the business, well, we know, well, you'll know as well as I do, I've been in bigger businesses than 1,000 and smaller businesses than 1,000. Managers can be selfish. They have a number on their head, potentially. So therefore, they will do what they need to do to make sure that they meet their needs. I think the biggest point I would say, probably from the points I was sort of touching on with the exec, is the managers got that attrition information as well. So therefore, they can see and be accountable for their splits, which generated partly, I guess, buy-in, partly accountability of if you're not doing it, actually, if you're starting to lose your high potentials and high performers, we'll have a lens on that. So you have an obligation to make sure that you're retaining your good people.
Without wanting to reinforce a cliche, what gets measured gets done, what gets rewarded gets done first. And most organisations think that there is a single reward, and that's the mistake they make. Coming back to the what is it that our high potentials need to keep them in the position, the rewards may be different for each of those individuals, but it's still part of the process that's part of it. This lady here had a question as well. Thank you.
Hi, thank you very much for your presentation. My question is closely linked to managers as well.
I'm glad I rehearsed managers.
My name is Fifi. I'm from the Department for Education, and we use the 9-box grid across government. And you mentioned that you've also used the 9-box grid, and it was good to see the 5-box grid. And I'm thinking, it's hard enough getting managers to choose from 9. How do we get them to choose from 5? Did you find that the process was simpler when you moved to 5? And the other question is, how did you upskill managers to actually do the sorting and the organization in a way that it wasn't awkward? Because I think one of the challenges that we have with talent and performance conversations is some of that judgment is subjective. And how did you help managers to put people in the right place in a fair way?
2 great questions. I use 9-box in a different organisation, so we haven't transitioned from one to another. I would say 5 was simpler. I think with 9, the challenge you have is sometimes the deliberation between box 6 and 7 can go on forever. The 5 actually just kind of merges those 2 together. So I was quite sceptical myself was it too simple? But I actually found that it just extinguished those conversations of, I think the more boxes, the more calibration you have, the more conversations you have, really kicking the can over something that isn't necessary. So I think 5 actually, personally, works better than 9. Again, I think it depends on organisation and I think it depends on what you're trying to achieve. I think the second question is really interesting around that, the difficult conversation, and ultimately, we piloted it. There's a lot of conversation a long time about, is this covert, is this overt, so do we keep it in the background? And the decision was, we don't want people to think like it's a secret. And actually, when we talk about the difficulties, it wasn't that difficult. And I think we were talking about a real minority of the business where someone might think that they were a high potential and actually they're a talent issue, right? You're not taught. I think that's a handful of conversations. We did support the managers through it, so we coached them. We do difficult conversations anyway. We ran a career conversations campaign through it as well. But yeah, I think for me, if I'm honest, I think we thought the same thing around this is going to be really difficult. And actually, when we put it in place, you're talking about a handful of conversations where people are not self-aware. And if you're talking about a valued contributor, like I said, you're talking about those people who come in 9, go home at 5, potentially been in the business for a number of years, maybe not, but it shouldn't come as a surprise if you articulate it to them in the right way. So I think, yeah, to probably summarize, I think it's less of a problem than I think we think it is. But we do absolutely need to support our managers on how do we have career conversations and for the minority, those difficult conversations. I think difficult conversations is probably a broader challenge that we have with our managers, right, in most businesses. I can't remember the last time I walked into a business where the middle management weren't the problem. But I'm not sure they always are.
How many middle managers in the room? Just saying, just while we're here. Yeah, nightmare, you people, honestly. We have been beaten by time, so join with me thanking Thomas for his contribution.
Thank you.
And now there's a couple of people who will still need to ask you questions because I think you've started a real set of ideas in people's mind.